here is the result. I know it's getting a little boring, but it's almost finished. And it's also a good time for a stupid question. Okay? Right, so these are the experimentally measured eigenvalues, the phases of the modes that they come out of the fibers. Right? And this is what the simulation tells me. Now, before you start judging, look at it. This is actually unwrapped. Right? So the modes that are in the center, they propagate on different speed than modes that are on the edge of the pyramid. Right? And this is unwrapped, but here the scale bar is 160 times 2 pi interval. Right? So if I take this information and wrap it in the 2 pi interval, I'm going to get this, which looks pretty much the same as here. And if I do the difference of these two, I get very, very good clean signal. Right? So for 1 centimeter of the fiber, it looks like even the faces are very, very predictable. But you can see here there is some kind of question that the grid is not perfectly maintained here and on the sides. Right? So if I do exactly the same with the 100 millimeters fiber, this aberration grows again proportionally. Right? And I have a problem. Right? Because if I don't match the faces, I am unable to predict properly the transmission matrix. Right? So it took a little while to realize what the problem is. And it actually looks like that the profile of the refractive index in the fiber or step index fibers is not exactly orthogonal, right? The thing is, if you do these fibers, right, you have to melt them. This is how they are manufactured, right? So you heat them up first to remove some impurities, right? And then you really melt them in the tower and pull them down. So for some time they are completely liquid, right? And this causes a diffusion of the material between the core and the cladding. But a perturbation calculus can be used in order to eliminate that, and with this implied, I got a perfect, almost perfect match. But it was still something I wasn't happy about. Still, the colors are there. So we've been looking for other possible aberrations of the refractive index, and we found that there is some because of the stress of the material, but only if we took all these into account, we got a perfect match. So now the optimization procedure has not over 19 degrees of freedom, where we also take care about the faces. And I decouple the misalignment parameters from the parameters of the fiber, right, and sort of extrapolate them. But eventually, after I run a couple of times, I get a perfect match. And I know exactly what is the core of the fiber, what is the numerical aperture, what is the diffusion rate, and all the other correction parameters in order to model the fiber accurately. Right, so with this I could bend the fiber finally, right? Hooray, right? That was tough. So, the theory, the same perturbation calculus can be used in order to find out what happens if you take a matrix, transmission matrix for a straight fiber and for a bent fiber. So it has to be adiabatic, so there must be a single operator that takes you from the straight fiber to the bent fiber. And it's possible to predict. I'm not going to go into that many details this time. But these are the results, right? So these are 5 different curvatures of the fiber. This is the experimentally isolated triangles of the deformation operator. So obviously if this is straight, nothing happens. But then if I start bending it, the modes start changing, as you can see here. And this is what the theory says. So the match is really, really good. Right? Now, I'm slightly cheating here because in order to get a perfect match, I had to scale the curvature of the fiber by a factor of roughly 77%. So the curvature that I put in the simulation has to be 77% smaller than what the experiment shows me. So the theory overestimates this, and I didn't know why for some time. But fortunately, the answer is quite simple, right? If you look at the structures of silica, as a density, they have a lot of different structures, right? But if you look at the density versus the refractive index, you can see that they are pretty much linear, right? So what happens in the fiber, if you bend it, you sort of squeeze it on one side and you extend it on the other side, and it also changes the refractive index, right? And it's actually acting for you. It's making the curvature less important. And the factor can be, this weird 77% can be described by this equation, which is 1 minus something where you only have the refractive index and the sigma, which is a Poisson ratio. This is a quantity of materials, right, that describes the ratio between the axial lateral stress. Now, you can think, okay, so why don't you do it in such a way that this number is 0, and then when you bend it, nothing happens. So, well, it would be cool, it would be really cool, but you need either negative refractive index or negative Poisson ratio materials. Both are very difficult to achieve. Negative Poisson ratio, if you take a rubber and you extend it, it sort of shrinks in the middle. If you've got negative Poisson ratio, you extend it and it actually expands in the middle. So find such a material, make a fiber out of this, and you have a flexible endoscope, right? Anyway, I'll skip this, we are slightly behind. So just to demonstrate the imaging, right? This is a standard USAF target that is typically used in this kind of experiments. My fiber was only big enough to take the last 4 of them, right? And the imaging is basically, again, by scanning a point down at the end of the fiber. So really quickly, if I take the original matrix image that was used by the experimentally acquired transmission matrix, you get this as the best standard. But if I replace my transmission matrix with a fully theoretically predicted transmission matrix for the same length of the fiber, I get this image. But this is only 10 millimeters, and remember, I have only this small aberration for the set index fiber. So when it's very, very short, like for example in the experiments in rats, right, it doesn't matter. I can use the theory for the perfect fiber, very simple theory, and everything works, I can take an image. But if I go longer, right, and if I do the same with the ideal fiber prediction, I completely lose the image, it's completely gone. This is how important the phase aberration is. If I take into account the diffusion, I can start seeing something, but the image is still pretty bad. And only if I take all these aspects into account, I get the image back fully, right? And the same is true for the flexibility. So if I bend the fiber like this, and this radius is actually at the edge of the deformation threshold for the fibers, from this ugly image that I've taken by bent fiber while using the straight transition matrix, the image is gone. With the full correction, I get this. But there is something interesting, right? If I actually use only the diagonal components of the deformation operator, I still get a very, very good image. Right? Also, if I only use the faces of the diagonal components, I also get almost perfect image. Which is sort of weird, but it explains that the important actions of the bending is just small faces of the eigenmodes, of the propagation invariant modes. And that's actually great, because if I have 2 bends, for example, one like that, one like that, it doesn't matter which one goes first, because these operators are diagonal and I can arbitrarily exchange them. And they commute. The physicists would say they commute. Doesn't matter which one goes first, which makes the problem much simpler. Right, this was published last year, about when I was giving this talk on the same conference in Nature Photonics. I was pretty pleased about it. So this is one down. It looks like that the flexibility may be possible. Right? So physicists will be happy and I can finally get some funding, right, to do some real stuff. To me, much bigger problems is the computational requirements. Right? It's heavily computationally intensive. So that's why I started to use CUDA and GPU cards. So this is Martin who did most of the work. So here you can see this is a live actually calculation. There's a couple of bars in our interface, and you can sort of live calculate all these shapes. This is not accelerated at all. I have something more entertaining for you. Some of you have seen that already, right? This is 50 micrometers, right? So the smallest projection of James Bond movie ever. Well, hard to publish this stuff probably on YouTube, but this is the one that we've done for publication. It's a cube that you can control from your multi-touch device, or iPhone or something. Well, in here I was cheating a little bit because these shapes are not created simultaneously. There is one point that really quickly moves around, because we are still using the acoustic deflector in order to defeat the speed. But now, with next generation of the GP, we could do it really fully. So, for example, this is, and Martin always makes NVIDIA logo because he believes that he can get some free hardware from them. It didn't happen so far. But in this case, you have 4,000 of points that are simultaneously there. It's fully coherent image. Works really well. So, the future work on these fibers, right? Similarly as Paul explained, this is actually the DO, DLP. A lot of segments, they can get me up to 20 kilohertz, so much faster implementation. So we can predict, we can calculate, but we can't implement at that speed. So the DLP should be able to do that. And believe it or not, even though that they are on and off, you can still do anything you want, including phase, amplitude, polarization, modulation. The algorithms are much more difficult, but it's hopefully possible. The other thing relates to this negative Poisson material. So these are photonic crystal fibers, and these are negative Poisson materials, or metamaterials. So it looks like that although you may not be able to do the core, you may be able to engineer the cladding of the fibers in such a way that when you start bending them, the right tension will be applied on the fiber and will cancel the randomization. So nobody ever actually used the photonic crystal fibers for the mechanical purposes. They are always used for optical purposes. But well, okay, I'll have a few more things, but I think everybody's tired, so I'll just go to the conclusions. Well, yes. Thank you for your attention. So, nobody gets the pound?
So are you in the matrix or outside the matrix?
I don't know how you, but I'm definitely outside the matrix.
Outside the matrix. Theoretically or practically?
Well, so, you know, I've never seen any miracles. So I don't have any reason to doubt that, well, that I'm not in the real world, right? But some people actually explain that miracles are completely impossible because we are in sort of an equivalent of a matrix.
You call miracles something which cannot be explained with physics, chemistry, we have some, with the rules we do, the laws we have,
Well, okay,
so
so,
right?
Right, that's completely unrelated to this topic, right? So imagine that you are a society that progresses really, really, really far, right? And you want to start seeing into people's brain, for example, and you know, you really track everything, right? But then you want to learn more about everything, more about yourself. So you start simulating products. And you have to do a lot of simulations, right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it's actually much more probable for us that we are in some kind of simulation than in the real world. You never know, right? So some people explain the miracles like that. I never seen any, so I'm still okay with it being in the simulation, even though I don't know about it. Right. Okay, the pound only applies if you ask stupid questions to the topic, okay? Just to be clear. No questions, everybody wants to go for a pint. Okay, I'll keep my pound then. Thank you for your attention.